Welcome to Communication Skills. Today we're going to consider a topic which is downward communication. We are going to know what downward communication is and what role it plays in an organization. Right, so now we make a progress. So you realize that in organizations, communication flows in different directions depending on hierarchy and purpose. So you understand that one of the most important direction is downward communication, which actually plays a key role in management and coordination. So downward communication ensures that instructions, policies, and organizational goals are clearly communicated, that is from higher levels of authority to lower level employees. So now what's the meaning of downward communication? Downward communication refers to the flow of information from top management to lower level employees, that is within an organization. So now this type of communication, or this form of communication, follows the formal chain of command, and it is used to guide, instruct, and inform employees. So now, according to GAFE and Law 2020, downward communication is regarded to be important and essential for directing employee activities and ensuring that organizational objectives are achieved. Now, what's the purpose of downward communication? Downward communication serves several important purposes. Now, what are those important purposes that downward communication serves? Number one, downward communication is important in the sense that it gives instructions and directives, because it is coming, the information is flowing from the top management to the lower level employees. So the first purpose that downward communication plays or serves in an organization is simply to give instructions and directives to the lower level employees. Secondly, downward communication is used to communicate organizational goals and policies. You are going to understand that organizational goals and policies are generated at the top management level. So now the top management level are the ones, or is the one that generates or that comes up with the policies and organizational goals. So at the end of it all, those goals and policies must be communicated to the lower level employees. So it is now the purpose, or it is now the role of that downward communication to ensure that the goals and the policies that are generated at the top management are passed down to the lower level employees. Now, another purpose that downward communication serves is simply to provide feedback on employee performance. So now, when the employees perform in a particular way, the management, the top management, will sit down and analyze the performance of the lower level employees, and then they shall be able to provide feedback on the performance of those employees. Another purpose that downward communication serves is to simply explain tasks and responsibilities. You will understand that it is the top management that always explain the tasks that are to be given to the subordinates or to the lower level employees, as well as the responsibilities that are to be given to the lower level employees. So whenever the top management is giving instructions or explaining how to go about certain tasks and explaining how certain responsibilities must be done, that we call it downward communication, because information is flowing from the top management to the lower level employees. Another purpose that downward communication serves is to motivate and guide employees. You will understand that the top management would always find ways and means of motivating and guiding the employees, those who are found at the lower level. Okay, so now the moment the top management motivates their employees in a particular way, there it means information is flowing from the top to the lower level management or to the lower level employees, and in the process, as they get motivated, they are receiving the information from the top management, and in the process the motivation comes in and the guidance also comes in. And the moment that happens, we call that downward communication. So we can see that downward communication, really it is of great significance and importance in each and every organization. Now, you will understand that the same downward communication, it ensures that all employees understand what is expected of them. So this statement summarizes the importance or the role or the purposes that downward communication serves in an organization. Now, what are the forms of downward communication? We have a good number of the forms of downward communication. So downward communication occur through various forms. And those forms include: number one, written communication; number two, memos; number three, reports; number four, emails; number five, policy documents; oral communication; meetings; briefings; speeches; instructions from supervisors; visual communication; charts; notices; posters, and many other more. So now you are going to understand that all those are the forms of downward communication. So it can either be written or it can be verbal. In the case of meetings, that is verbal. But there are sometimes when you can write a document, that is written communication. So downward communication, it takes both written communication and verbal communication, but in a formal setup. Now, let's look at the examples of downward communication. When a manager gives instructions to employees, that is called a downward communication. Where a school head teacher, or when a school head teacher issues guidelines to teachers on how to go about certain duties and certain tasks, that is called downward communication, because the head teacher is operating from the top management, so is giving guidelines and instructions to the teachers. That is a school environment. That is called downward communication. So when a company sends policy updates to staff, that is called downward communication. There is an update on the policy, and then that update or that information is being sent to the staff, to the members of staff. That is called downward communication. When a supervisor assigns duties to workers, we call that downward communication. So now, what are the advantages of downward communication? One of the advantages of downward communication that it provides clear direction and guidance, because the top management would have done its duty of explaining everything. So it provides clear direction and guidance. Number two, it ensures coordination of activities. It ensures that activities are well coordinated. Then it also helps maintain discipline and order, because instructions are coming from the top management so as to ensure that everyone understands his or her own role, and that there must be discipline and order in a workplace or in an organization. So it also helps to improve organizational efficiency. When downward communication is effective in an organization, then there will be an improvement in terms of organizational efficiency. Then the same downward communication, it helps to make sure that goals and expectations are communicated effectively. So downward communication communicates goals and the expectations effectively, and this is very much important. Now let's try to look at the disadvantages of downward communication. What are the disadvantages of downward communication? So now, the first one, that downward communication can lead to distortion of message as information passes through levels. That is, from the top, getting down to the middle, lower level management, and finally to the employees. So the message, the information may get distorted in the process. Another disadvantage, that employees may feel excluded from decision making, which is also a serious issue in an organization. Sometimes when the employees who are actually implementing, who are doing the actual work on the ground, if they feel excluded from decision making, sometimes they may not really do things out of love and commitment. Sometimes frustration also comes in because there is that feeling of being used as robots. So now, in every organization, no one should feel like he's a robot who's just being told what to do. Everyone must participate in decision making, and when people participate in decision making, they will feel to be part of. They will have that feeling of belonging to something, and because it's something that has been done collectively together as a team, so everyone would want to fight and work extra hard so that it is achieved, because at the end of the day, the language will be we have done it, not where the language will be they have done it. Others are just the ones to do the work. So it's a disadvantage in the sense that employees feel excluded from decision making where they just receive the instructions. So now, another disadvantage is lack of feedback. Okay, lack of feedback may cause misunderstandings. Sometimes there's that lack of feedback, which may also cause misunderstanding. When the instructions goes to the employees should give the feedback, but that feedback sometimes it may not even reach the top management, which is a disadvantage. So the same downward communication can reduce employee motivation if communication is too authoritative. So if the information or the communication is too authoritative, that can reduce employee motivation. So it's important also for those operating for the top management to be careful of how they pass information to the subordinates. You have to be mindful of the tone that you use, because if it sounds to be so authoritative, you sound as if you are a commander, chief commander, you just command and then people should do. Then those who are supposed to do that work, they may not do that work with happiness within their hearts. They will end up doing things in frustration because they don't feel respected, they don't feel considered, they don't feel counted. They are doing things out of frustrations. So that can reduce employee motivation if communication is too authoritative. So now, what are the barriers to downward communication? Downward communication may be affected by poor communication skills of managers. We have got certain managers, supervisors, leaders, directors who have poor communication skills. They do not know how to talk. They don't have the skills of communication. That is also a barrier to downward communication. Another barrier could be information overload. If there's too much information that's coming from the top management to the employees, that overload can be a barrier. Then another barrier to downward communication is lack of clarity in instructions. When there is no clarity in the instructions that are being given, that becomes barrier to downward communication, meaning that the communication would have been done but not effective, not understood, because there is lack of clarity in those instructions. Another barrier to downward communication is hierarchical gaps. Okay, hierarchical gaps. We're talking now about the hierarchy. That's from the top management getting back to the lower level employees, or maybe from the lower level employee getting up to the top management. So now, when the information is flowing from the top, the barrier could be those hierarchical gaps. If there are some gaps in that hierarchy, the information should flow from the top to the middle. Possibly maybe the person who should receive the information in the middle is not is not around, is not present at that particular moment. The information will be held from that particular office, not until that person is around. That's when the information will continue flowing until it reaches the last person or the intended person. So those are hierarchical gaps. Those are hierarchical gaps, and these things are common in every organization, even in the government, where the information may end up getting stuck in a particular office just because the right person is not there. So everyone feels that he's supposed to maybe sign or authorize that this information should continue now being in transit. So you can see that these are really disadvantages. Another another barrier to downward communication is psychological barrier, such as fear. Okay. Now, how can we improve downward communication? To improve downward communication, organizations should make sure that they do what? They use clear and simple language. Number two, they should encourage feedback from employees. When they communicate, let employees be told, say, please, whenever you receive any information, give the feedback. And that will even motivate them more because they'll feel like they're being considered. Then what else? Ensure timely communication. Let communication be done at the right time. Then another way on how you can improve downward communication, you have to avoid information overload. From the top level there, avoid information overload. What else? Promote open communication culture. That's very much important. So now, according to DeVito 2019, effective communication requires both clarity and feedback to ensure that everyone understands. So now, in summary, downward communication is what? It's a vital aspect of formal communication in organizations. So it ensures that employees receive instructions, understand organizational goals, and perform their duties effectively. So, for it to be effective, it must be clear, timely, and supported by feedback.